Tired? Stressed out? Overworked?
I've had it. Enough already.
It doesn't have to be that way. Your host, Bob Roth, Executive Director of the David Lynch Foundation, has learned that you can thrive without tension in this fast-paced world. This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indy 104.
This is Bob Roth, and you're listening to Success Without Stress on Sirius XM Indy 104. And for the last few weeks, we've been looking at how a person can be successful in life, whether in their professional life, in their personal life, in their relationships with their children or their partner, relationships in the workplace, without stress overwhelming their lives, without feeling as if becoming a slave to stress. And the way we defined stress was not some demand, some pressure from the outside, because pressures and demands are always going to be there. The way we define stress is, and the way science defines stress is, how we respond to those demands, how we respond to those pressures. You know, if you get a bad night's sleep and you hear some bad news or you have some pressures or something goes wrong, it's overwhelming. And we feel our muscles get tight in our shoulders, or we get a headache, or our jaws tighten up, or our stomach tightens. There's a hormone called cortisol spikes. Cortisol is an anxiety hormone. Even the electrical activity in the brain, even the connections between the front of the brain and the back of the brain, between the executive functioning, the CEO of the brain, and the rest of the brain go offline. That's the stress response. That kills, that undermines, that ruins life, that ruins our ability to enjoy and love the people that we live with and work with. On the other hand, if we have a good night's sleep, if we're taking good care of ourselves, if we're on top of our game, something goes wrong, which inevitably does, water off a duck's back. We are resilient. So in the last few weeks, we've been looking at how a simple meditation technique, evidence-based meditation technique, in particular transcendental meditation, allows an individual to take profound rest at will, deeper than sleep. Throw off for 20 minutes twice a day. Throw off the accumulation of stress and tension and fatigue. At the same time, wake up and strengthen those connections in the brain and become more of who we want to be. And in the past few weeks, we've interviewed Jerry Seinfeld, and we've interviewed David Lynch, and we've talked to top medical doctors, and we've heard from top business professionals. Tonight, I am most honored to spend the evening with Roberta Lowenstein. Roberta is the chair and trustee of the Joey Lowenstein Foundation. We call it JLF. And she's the mother of Joey Lowenstein, a 17-year-old young man with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, who's been practicing transcendental meditation for several years. Actually, I taught him to meditate, and Joey inspired the launch of the Joey Lowenstein Foundation. Tonight, we're going to look at how, first of all, we're going to find out from Roberta, some very personal things. What's it like to be the mom of an autistic child? How did she hear about Joey the first time she heard about him being autistic? How does she mark his growth? Right now, autism affects 1 in 88 children, and 1 in 54 children with autism are boys. Autism is actually the fastest growing serious developmental disability in the United States, and autism costs a family at least $60,000 a year. And yet, autism receives less than 5% of research funding of many less prevalent childhood diseases. And there's no medical detection or no cure for autism. So tonight is going to be, for me, very fascinating, a chance to spend some time with my friend Roberta and have her tell us the story. We're also going to listen to some audio excerpts from a global webinar that was held on transcendental meditation and its impact on autism and stress. But first, I just want to go to Roberta and say, welcome, Roberta. Thank you for joining us tonight on Sirius XM on 104. And
well, thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me the story. Tell me about Joey. Tell me, how old was Joey when you first, just tell me about autism.
Okay. Well, my son, Joey, Joseph Lowenstein, was 2.5 when he was diagnosed. And at about 1.5, I thought something might be amiss because he wasn't imitating like some of the other babies were in Mommy and Me class, etc.
What does imitating mean?
Well, just, imitating hand movements, gestures, imitating other babies, what
I
they were
see.
doing, following their lead. But at 2.5, he was positively diagnosed, and it took a while. We lived in Florida. There wasn't much information as there is now 15 years ago. So it took many, many trips to many, many experts in Florida and in Maryland and different areas to get a firm diagnosis. And I do have to say it was absolutely devastating to me and my husband, Norman, because all your dreams are, kind of destroyed, in one fell swoop. But then you put your marching hat on and you decide, well, you're going to go fight this thing as best as you can and get the best treatment that you can for your son.
Does an autistic child distance himself or herself from his mother? Was it harder for you to bond, to make a connection?
Well, I think Joey and I have always, and even with his dad also, had a very strong connection to each other. Not necessarily would he hug you. He would put his head down and kind of push you away, but we knew there was love there, and I always demand a kiss. Even to this day, I have to get a morning kiss.
Now tell me, for a person who doesn't know what autism is, describe autism.
Well, autism is a spectrum disorder. It is basically some kids are nonverbal, some kids are very verbal. There's a big umbrella about concerning autism, and it affects everything in your life. It affects the way they learn. It affects the way you live. It does obviously create a lot of stress in the household because you want your child to be as good as the child down the street. You go out and you seek out all the best therapists that you can. And luckily, we were able to bring a lot of this into the home. And I actually started a home program. And initially, myself and one of my helpers were trained to do ABA therapy. And
ABA therapy
is applied behavioral analysis therapy. And that was the only therapy back 15 years ago that was recognized. Now there's a lot of different other therapies also.
And does an autistic child, was there a point when you thought, my child Joey is developed, he's not as intelligent, he's not whatever the word is, and then at some point you realize, oh my gosh, there's an internal world to my child, and talk
Right.
about that.
Well, I always felt that Joey understood, and I would always say to people, don't talk about him as if he's not sitting right there. And most people would start to do that because they figured he didn't really understand, he wasn't talking, he wasn't thinking. But the whole time he was thinking, he was absorbing. And it was 3 years ago that I found RPM, which is a letterboard, the use of a letterboard to spell. And I had no idea that Joey could spell anything except for cow, C-O-W, or mom, M-O-M, because we had taught him those particular words. I didn't realize what I was doing, but at the time I had labeled everything in my house. So the kitchen sink was labeled, literally, the refrigerator, the closets, where the cookies were, whatever. Everything was labeled. There were words all over my house. I don't know why I did it, except I thought, well, let me at least show him words. He's not interested in reading. He's not interested in writing. But this whole time, he was absorbing all of this. And when he first started spelling with the letterboard, I had to call friends in because I couldn't believe it. I almost fell off the chair when somebody asked him, what do you want to be for Halloween? And he spelled cowboy. I didn't know that he knew that word. So it's been quite a journey.
I have to interrupt here and say that I taught Joey to meditate, and now Joey practices transcendental meditation 20 minutes twice a day. But on this letterboard, Joey, it was like hard to, sometimes he wouldn't make eye contact. I wasn't sure that he was listening to me or understanding. And then he would write out these absolutely sophisticated, like profound, deep insights into the nature of life. I know he had these ongoing discussions through Skype with a rabbi in Israel where this little 16-year-old Joey at the time, profound discussions about what the ancient rabbis said about the nature of life, really almost cosmic information. And I just ended up calling him Rabbi Joey. I had the sense of there was this interior that was very well developed, but just he had this inability to articulate words, but everything else was more sophisticated than most kids who are 17 or 18 years old.
I've been reading some books to him, and he's really been very interested in hearing me speak with him and, listening to me reading to him. I use the letterboard sporadically with him to ask him questions about what I'm reading.
Letterboard is alphabet where he can type out the words, what he wants to say. So
he actually points to them with his finger. Right. So you have to follow along what he's doing. There are some mechanisms out there and some apps that know, it could show up on an iPad, and that's going to be our next step.
One last question, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go to a very short audio clip from a psychiatrist talking about transcendental meditation and autism, who participated in the webinar that you funded and Joey Lowenstein Foundation funded. Does an autistic child get depressed, get sad? Do you get the feeling he's looking around and seeing other children, boys, girls, who apparently, and he gets down on himself? Is there any sort of
I
sense
do
of
believe,
that?
because he doesn't have speech, and that's one thing that he's spelled over and over on his letterboard, that he really wants to speak, and he really wants to talk, and he really wants to have a girlfriend, and he really wants to have a life. And I think all those things will come true because he has that inner desire, and has this inner desire to learn, and he's picked up things when we didn't even know he was learning. So it's very exciting to me. I'm really looking forward to see what happens in the next few years. And meditation has been amazing for him and I to bond together. And as he said, it calms his mind and his mom.
What we're going to do is I'm going to come back to transcendental meditation. After this, we have an audio from a global webinar that was sponsored by the Joey Lowenstein Foundation in partnership with the foundation I head, the David Lynch Foundation, which was entitled Autism, Meditation, and Stress. The focus of a distinguished panel of experts explored the research, clinical applications, and the uses of a simple evidence-based meditation technique called transcendental meditation for reducing stress and anxiety, improving brain functioning, and actually enhancing the quality of life among children with autism spectrum disorder. First person we're going to hear from was a guest on my show a few weeks back, Dr. Norman Rosenthal, who's a clinical professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University School of Medicine and the best-selling author of Transcendence, Healing and Transformation Through Transcendental Meditation, and The Gift of Adversity, a recent fantastic book. So let's take a listen.
Autism spectrum disorder, which is a complex condition. What I'd like to emphasize is that an important component of autism spectrum disorder is anxiety. Anxiety that can be very distressing and even disabling, interfering with people with autism spectrum disorder who then tend to want to avoid novel situations, social situations, and interpersonal closeness. As I surveyed the various conditions for which TM might be useful, I came across several young people, adolescents and young adults with autism spectrum disorder who reported considerable benefit. And that made me very curious about its potential in this particular condition. It turns out that these young people learn very readily how to practice TM and actually enjoy it. But imagine my delight to find that many of them also report very impressive changes. And it's not just they who report it, but their families as well. For example, they will be more inclined to explore novel situations. I remember one young man who suddenly was willing to eat new kinds of foods that he avoided before, or another who was hugging various members of his family, whereas previously he kept very much to himself. And then there was the student who had been labeled a, quotes, problem child, but now was getting the Student of the Month award, which was very unexpected and very appreciated. So we are now at an anecdotal stage. We don't have the clinical trials yet, but to a parent with an autistic spectrum child who's looking around for something to help, it's very hard to ask such people to wait the lengthy time involved in getting clinical trials accomplished and publications published. These are lengthy processes. I would recommend that such people should consider right now the possibility that TM might be an option to help with all the difficulties, especially the anxiety associated with autism spectrum disorder.
That was Dr. Norman Rosenthal, a clinical professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical School, and an expert on the effects of meditation, specifically transcendental meditation, on autism spectrum disorder. And I am very fortunate to have as my guest Roberta Lowenstein. Roberta is the chair and trustee of the Joey Lowenstein Foundation, and she's the mother of Joey Lowenstein, a 17-year-old young man with autism who's been practicing TM for several years and who's inspired the establishment of his foundation, which one branch of the purpose of the foundation is to bring transcendental meditation to children with autism. I'm going to define transcendental meditation in a moment. Well, I guess I'll give a quick definition now. Then I want to talk to Roberta. Greg here, my producer, is nodding. Yes, this is the time to explain it. Transcendental meditation, for those of you who don't know, is a very simple, incredibly simple, easily learned mental technique that's practiced for 20 minutes twice a day for adults, 10 minutes for children, sitting comfortably in a chair with the eyes closed. And during that short period of time, the active, agitated thinking mind, like choppy waves on the surface of the ocean, have the chance to just settle down towards quieter and quieter levels of the mind, like quieter levels of the ocean, to experience a level of inner calm and tranquility and peace and wakefulness that exists deep within every human being. Every human, it's already there. It's there. Just like there's waves on the surface of the ocean and quiet at its depth, that's part of the ocean. In the same way, there's active thinking mind, our gotta mind on the surface, but every one of us has a reservoir of calm within, and transcendental meditation is a simple technique that anyone can learn in a few minutes, few hours, over a couple of days, and then you've got it for the rest of your life to access that inner calm. And when we experience that, according to extensive scientific research, the body gains a state of rest deeper than the deepest part of deep sleep. Stress, tension, anxiety are dissolved. Connections in the brain wake up, and we find ourselves healthier, more resilient, more energized, more focused, and happier, just because we've gotten rid of this foreign element with stress. So with that as the background, and one of the reason I asked Roberta to come on the show, other than she's a dear friend, is because of her experience, first of all, learning to meditate herself, but also introducing it to her son, who's a non-verbal, non-speaking autistic child. And so what was it, Roberta, that attracted you to transcendental meditation? And then why did you think, oh, maybe Joey would like it too?
Well, there was a whole group of us actually that learned meditation with you, Bob. And I started practicing it, and I found that it really helped me to calm my mind and deal with all the stresses that I had to deal with as a widow, taking care of my son who's 17, and figure out like what's the best new practice to do, how do I find the next best expert, etc. And then I thought one day, I wonder if Joey could learn how to do this. Since I had already discovered the letterboard and I had that miracle happen, I thought, well, let me see if possibly this could help him somehow with his anxiety, because all children with autism have a lot of anxiety. It's just part of their life because they can't communicate the way we do. So I asked you, Bob, and you said, yeah, well, let's give it a try. And we came into your office, and Joey was very good about it. I also had two of his therapists trained, Matthew and Brianne. And so we all learned how to meditate at the same time together. Joey learned. And then I found with Joey that it was a process, and it would be a process for all the autistic parents out there for their children to learn. Some probably might be able to do it quicker than others. But with Joey, initially he would sit on his bed for 2 minutes, and it was hard for him to close his eyes and keep them closed. Every time I would look at him, his eyes were open. So I decided to get him a band to put around his eyes, like you would sleep with, and it was soft material. And I found that really helped him a great deal. So you have to innovate and find what's going to help your child. But I did find that Joey went from 2 minutes to 5 minutes, and then he'd jump off the bed and run to the kitchen. But now he's doing 20 minutes, and when I say, Joe, it's time to meditate, he runs to his room, he puts his blindfold on, and is ready to go. And he just absolutely loves it. He just loves meditation.
He described it once as, he said it's a time when nothing is expected of him from outside. It just, he doesn't have to behave a particular way. I thought there was, in addition to it giving him peace and tranquility, it was just a moment of ease. And I so enjoyed teaching Joey. I felt right from the beginning, even though there was that sort of, he was unsure, he was uncertain what he should be doing, maybe a little hyperactive. I thought that there's a depth in Joey, as there is in many autistic children. There's just a real depth there, resonant. And it was just a matter of time. And what changes have you seen in him from it, or what benefits? Have you seen something?
Well, he has described that he absolutely feels much calmer and that he's able to deal with his day much better in a much easier way, and that the anxieties that he feels really do get calmed down. So it makes him a happier, healthier person because he just feels like I can get by with my day and I can do the best I can do and I can go and meditate when I get stressed.
When we come back, we're going to have more with my friend and guest, Roberta Lowenstein, and we're going to hear more from an audio highlights from a webinar, Autism, Meditation, and Stress. This is Success Without Stress on Sirius XM 104. This is your host, Bob Roth. We'll be right back with Roberta Lowenstein.
This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indy 104. Celebrities, CEOs, veterans, and students have learned through transcendental meditation that you can live your life free from anxiety, tension, and fatigue. This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indy 104.
Welcome back to Success Without Stress. I am your host, Bob Roth. I'm joined today by Roberta Lowenstein, who's the chair and trustee of the Joey Lowenstein Foundation. Today we're discussing a very interesting topic: how transcendental meditation, a simple evidence-based meditation technique that reduces stress, improves health, wakes up the brain, sharpens the mind, its effects on autism spectrum disorder children and adults. And before we go to Roberta, we have one more clip from the Autism, Meditation, and Stress webinar that was held a few months back, which was hosted actually by Roberta Lowenstein's foundation, the Joey Lowenstein Foundation. And we're going to hear from Dr. David Black. Dr. Black is a pediatric neuropsychologist, a scientist, and the director of the Center for Autism Assessment and Treatment in Silver Spring, Maryland. And his research is focused on the best outcomes among children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders. Dr. Black is a strong advocate for the use of transcendental meditation for children with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So let's take a listen.
I'm excited about the prospect that transcendental meditation holds for individuals on the autism spectrum. Autism spectrum disorders describe a complex syndrome in which there are difficulty with socialization, with communication, and where there are very often the presence of unusual, restricted, or repetitive behaviors. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that the rates of autism are 1 in 88 in general, but affecting 1 in 54 boys. And the worldwide estimate of autism puts a prevalence rate at around 1%. And in fact, there's one study out of South Korea that suggests the rate may be even higher, as high as 2.4%, or affecting 1 in 38 people. Because autism fundamentally impacts one's ability to socialize or to interact with others, most of the day-to-day routines are fundamentally stressful. Most routines involve social interaction in one form or another. There's also a strong need for many on the autism spectrum to have consistency, to have routine, and that itself poses its own source of stress and challenge when things unexpected happen on a day-to-day basis. As a result, many people with autism spectrum disorders are in a state of chronic stress. This chronic stress has numerous downstream consequences, including higher rates of anxiety. Most studies put the overall estimate at around 40%, but some suggest that prominent anxiety symptoms are as high as 80%. There's also trouble with sleep, there's trouble with emotion regulation, self-regulation. And as individuals go from adolescence to young adulthood, depression rates climb quite a bit as well. The cost of this to the individual, to family, and to society is enormous. Many children and adolescents have great difficulty moving into independence, taking on adult responsibilities. Families incur much higher psychological and financial burdens, and there's enormous cost to society. So as we think about, well, what can we do about this? How can we target the anxiety and stress that is so common in autism spectrum disorders? I happened upon the opportunity to meet with Dr. Rosenthal, and I learned about many of the anecdotal reports of adolescents and young adults with autism spectrum disorders who are benefiting greatly from transcendental meditation. And that led us to undertake a very small study to see, well, can we find a group of children and young adults who meditate consistently, who are on the autism spectrum? And if they can meditate consistently, do they benefit from it? What we found from this study was rather startling. We found that, one, nearly all of the individuals we evaluated were able to meditate consistently, and two, they reported dramatic decreases in anxiety, reductions in stress. There was consistency in the adolescents and young adults and their parents describing much better emotion regulation, the tantrums or the difficulty with just tolerating very small changes in what they were expecting to diminish significantly. There was also this rather startling increase in the willingness to try new things, to do things that they hadn't done before.
This is Bob Roth, and you were just listening to Dr. David Black, who's a pediatric psychologist and an expert on the use of transcendental meditation for children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders. And I'm here with my friend Roberta Lowenstein, who's a mother and the founder of a foundation to bring, among other things, to bring transcendental meditation to children with autism. Roberta, Dr. Black was talking about the impact that stressful impact that autism can have on families and relationships, and the anecdotal evidence that suggests that transcendental meditation can have a positive effect on that. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that, the stress levels that would build up in the house with Joey, particularly as a widow, because I know your husband passed away when Joey was young in an accident, and how meditation helped diffuse that?
Well, meditation really has helped us a great deal in that it binds us together. It's something we can do 20 minutes twice a day, quietly, privately, without any noise, no TV, no music playing, and we just really just feel a bond with each other, which I think is something that there's no other way you can actually achieve that except through this meditation method. And it's really, I think, brought us even closer together than we were before. And I do feel that all the parents out there should think about taking this course with their children and just see what the benefits to them would be, because each person might have a different outcome. But I do see where Joey is sleeping better, which is one of the things that Dr. Black said. I do feel that it also just calms him down. I mean, he just feels like he's calmer and, as I said earlier, can cope with the world in a better way than he could without meditating.
Does it surprise you when Dr. Black says that his experience is that most autistic children can meditate?
Not at all. I think that it's something that can be taught. My son, I didn't know if he would be able to do it, but he was able to. And here's a teenager. He's 16 years old. For him to sit still for 20 minutes, most people think is like a miracle. But the fact is, he saw the benefit of it, and every time he would do it more and more, it helped him, see the light, so to speak, that he really felt calmer and that he could, enjoy his day much better.
I want to interject here because if people have a conventional understanding that meditation is somehow trying to calm or lasso or harness your active, noisy, scattered mind, like those waves on the surface of the ocean, like you're somehow trying to stop those waves. I know many people listening to the show may have tried different forms of meditation, and I often hear the comment, I'd love to meditate, I could never do it because I can never clear my mind of thoughts. I could never stop thinking. I could never focus on my breath or a point and stop my mind from wandering. And I always make the point that not all meditations are the same. There are certain types of meditation that involve concentration and control of the mind, very difficult to do, actually quite unnatural, and they don't really produce the results we're talking about of deep rest and relaxation and release of stress. There's other types of meditation called mindfulness, where you're just sort of passively observing your thoughts and emotionally not engaged and just sort of being present. Again, that's not transcendental meditation. That's just watching those waves rise and fall on the ocean. Transcendental meditation is not concentration. It's not just observation. It's actually, in a very simple, effortless way, taking that dive, allowing the active, agitated thinking mind, like those waves on the surface, to just quietly, gently settle down to your own settled source deep within that every human being has. You don't have to believe in it. You can think this is just complete foolishness. You can be 100% skeptical. It doesn't matter. The technique works. It's like you can be skeptical about electricity, but you can turn on a light switch. And if you believe in electricity, it doesn't make the light any brighter. So belief is not an element here. Transcendental meditation is not an acquired skill. It's not something that after months and months and months and months you finally figure it out. Even Joey, for those first minute or two, he was meditating. He expanded the time over time, but right from the beginning, he was doing it. And then he felt comfortable for 2 minutes, and then 4 minutes, and then 10 minutes, and now 20 minutes. So I want to make that point that Joey and any child who does transcendental meditation or adult, we're not trying to stop the mind from wandering. That's an impossible, unnatural act. We're just allowing the agitated thinking mind to effortlessly, gently, naturally settle down to that source of thought that exists within everyone. Now, Roberta, I know that you're quite active here in New York City with the David Lynch Foundation and the partnership with the Joey Lowenstein Foundation, and that coming up you're hosting a series of salons, of gatherings of parents and healthcare professionals that are involved with, either have children who have autism on the autism spectrum disorder or else involved in it. Tell me a little bit about these salons and their purpose.
Well, the salons are to bring people together to learn about TM and how it will help them and their autistic children or young adults to, cope with their day. And basically, we're bringing in different specialists, whether they're speech therapists or occupational therapists, people that work with autistic children, to learn about meditation so that then they can go and talk to their clients or parents or whoever that they know that are struggling with autism, and to see if this would be something they would be interested in. Because I feel very strongly that it's really helped Joey and helped me and helped the two of us. And I want to give back to everybody, and so does Joey. Joey came to me about a year and a half ago and said, I want to start a foundation to help people that have autism. And one of the main things he wants to support is for people to learn how to meditate, the parents and the children. So that's one of our goals, and we're starting our first salon on March 6th at the David Lynch Foundation from 6 to 8 p.m.
So if you would like information about the salons in New York City, the first one will be held March 6th at the David Lynch Foundation in Midtown Manhattan. You can write info@davidlynchfoundation.org, info@davidlynchfoundation.org to find out more details about the salon that Roberta is helping to organize and lead. And if you live outside of New York City area and you'd like information about salons and meetings and information that's being held around the country or around the world, please also email info@davidlynchfoundation.org. I have another question for you. Is the medical profession in general slow to adopt new changes in the treatments of autistic children? I know this letterboard, for example. Are they slow to recognize, in many regards, the high functioning, the high level of interior that autistic children have? I've read these books that children have written that you would never know. Where does the state of modern medicine and autism today?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a medical issue or it's an issue of different beliefs and different therapies that some people feel very strongly about their therapy. But I do have to say that RPM, which is Rapid Prompting Method, which is the letterboard that you're speaking of, has opened our world and has opened many other families' worlds. And these many children have written books using a letterboard. And if you think about spelling out everything that you're saying at this moment, moment, it takes a long time to spell all this out. And to actually write a book is amazing. And I'm actually reading a book to Joey now that was written by a 14-year-old who's now 17, who says that some of the therapies that we started with may not work for all kids. It's just like any medical treatment may not work for the whole population. And one of the issues is that this particular treatment, RPM, or therapy, hasn't been quote-unquote studied. But the proof is that these are these children's words. These are not the therapist's words. Nobody's moving the letterboard. This is what these children, and as you have very rightly said, Joey talks to a rabbi in Israel. We don't know what he's going to ask Joey or talk to Joey about, and he just comes out with very profound statements.
I often thought about what it would be like for me if I had this same interior, but I couldn't speak. It was like I had a mask or something over my mouth, or something was with my vocal cords. Everything was intact inside, but I couldn't communicate. I think I would go very deep within. I think I would, and I think that's what I see with Joey. Joey's not a superficial kid. Joey's a 17-year-old boy, and he's a regular 17-year-old boy. He's a great skier and snowboarder and very athletic and very dynamic, smart. But he considers his considerations, his mullings, his thoughts, very profound insights into the nature of life, eternal truths. It's hard to communicate, but I love being around Joey. I'm a big fan of Joey's. I follow him on Facebook, Joey Lowenstein. And you can go to joeylowenstein.org. You should, all the listeners, go to Joey and read what he writes. Through Joey, you'll have a sense of the world of autism, and he's not alone. I mean, Joey's a great kid, but there's a lot of great kids who have autism many of whom who can't speak. And I love the work of the Joey Lowenstein Foundation. I love your dedication. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go to one more clip. And this is again from our webinar, Autism, Meditation, and Stress, which focused in on the effects of transcendental meditation, which was hosted by another dear friend and absolutely award-winning journalist, Rita Cosby, and author and great advocate for autism and transcendental meditation, Rita Cosby. But we're going to hear from Dr. Bill Stixrud. Dr. Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist and an adjunct faculty member at the Children's National Medical Center. He's an assistant professor of psychiatry, behavioral sciences, and pediatrics at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Let's take a listen.
I've been doing clinical neuropsychology for 30 years, and it never really occurred to me to teach TM to kids on the autism spectrum until Serena Grosswald and I did a couple studies on middle school kids with ADHD, teaching them TM. In the first study, one of the kids who benefited the most was this boy who was very socially awkward, and before he started meditating, didn't make eye contact with the other kids, was very socially isolated. And we heard from his teachers that after 3 months of meditation, he was starting to fool around with the other kids, and he actually went to the principal of the school and wanted more social clubs, social opportunities. That got our attention. And we did a second study, and a kid, the year before we started the study at the school, she knew how to meditate, but she didn't want to do it. She wouldn't refuse to do it. And at one point, she bargained with her parents. She said, I'll meditate if you take me off all these medications. She's on 4 or 5 psychiatric medications. And the parents agreed, and over time, they weaned her off the medications, and the girl started practicing TM twice a day. And her teachers told us that by the end of the year, this kid was so much better than she'd ever been. And I'm not saying that if kids meditate, they never need medication, but we really learned that kids with a lot of social difficulty can meditate, and they can benefit from it dramatically. And this wasn't surprising me entirely, because the experts on stress say that there's 4 aspects of life that make it stressful: novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat, and a low sense of control. And we know that the people on the spectrum, as David and Norman were saying, that except for the most familiar situations, everything tends to be novel and unpredictable. And so many of the kids in the spectrum also are so sensitive, their sensory systems are so sensitive, that the world feels more intense and more threatening. And in part because they don't get the social logic of the world that well, in part because they have trouble flexibly adapting, they experience a low sense of control. So it turns out that kids in the spectrum are wired to be anxious and easily stressed, which is a challenge, because we know from 30 years of research on learning that it's very hard to learn if you feel unsafe and you feel stressed. And we know that it's very hard to activate what Stephen Porges calls the social engagement systems, the aspects of our communication that allow us to engage with other people when we don't feel safe and our stress response is turned on. So the great challenge is helping kids on the autism spectrum feel safe in their own skin and feel safe in the social world. And if we think about the interventions that are used with kids in the spectrum in schools, there are things like minimizing transitions and visual schedules and social stories and giving kids a safe address or a safe room in the school that they can go to, a safe place where if they're stressed they can go and kind of recover. And what it's looking like in these anecdotes that we're hearing about these many, many kids is that TM can actually accomplish this goal from the inside. That many of these kids are really experiencing that they have a safe address inside themselves. And what happens is when kids, just like adults, when they meditate, and their stress hormones start to normalize, and their brain starts to work in a more coherent manner, that their thinking gets more orderly, and they get more flexible in the way they handle life, and that they adapt to life more easily. And the other really interesting thing is that we know that from the very earliest research on TM, one of the things that demonstrated so clearly is that people who meditate are less reactive to stress. They don't respond as much to stressors as they did before. And one of this has to be related to this finding that, of a study that was done 6 or 7 years ago where they recruited experienced meditators, people who've been doing TM for 30 years. And they had them put their hands in hot water that's hot enough to be very painful. And they looked at how does the brain react to the pain. What they found is that 40-50% less brain reactivity in response to pain in the experienced meditators. So they're curious, how long does it take to get that? Do you have to do it for 30 years? They taught the control group. And the control group within 2 to 3 months also experienced 40-50% less brain reactivity to pain. Now the really interesting thing about this in relation to autism is that it's looking like the brain circuitry that responds to physical pain is the same circuitry that responds to the pain, the social pain, like the pain of rejection. So this may be one mechanism why when people learn TM and they practice it regularly, they tend to have a better mood, they tend to have better stress tolerance, and they tend to be more flexible in the way that they manage their life. And the last thing I'll say is that we know that parents of older adolescents on the autism spectrum, that they tend to have stress levels that are comparable, stress hormone levels that are comparable to those of soldiers in combat. So ideally, we make TM available to the parents of kids in the spectrum as well. It's a very stressful job. But if just kids meditating can calm their parents as well, this is a really good thing. And I'll just say that in closing, I'll say that over the last two or 3 years, I've been talking with kids a lot about stuff that can be life transforming. I mean, there's a lot of interventions that help a little bit. But I talk about stuff like deciding to get a good night's sleep every night, or getting a girlfriend, or various things that can be life transforming. And you think about it, that over the course of the last 2,000 years, millions of people all over the world who meditate regularly have described it as being life transforming in the sense that it changes the course of one's life in a positive direction. And I think what we're hearing, and it's certainly my experience, is that practicing TM in kids in the spectrum, very likely that they're no different in the sense that this can be really something that can be life altering.
You were just listening to Dr. Bill Stixrud, who's a clinical neuropsychologist and a faculty member at the Children's National Medical Center and assistant professor of psychiatry at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, talking about the research and benefits of the simple evidence-based transcendental meditation technique on autism. And one might wonder why we're spending so much of this hour-long program focusing in on the effects of transcendental meditation on autism. And just consider, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, autism now affects 1 in 88 children, and 1 in 44 of those children are boys. Autism, these figures are the fastest growing serious developmental disability in the United States. With all of this, autism receives less than 5% of research funding, which is compared to many less prevalent childhood diseases. One other thing that I find interesting is that boys are 5 times more likely than girls to have autism, and that there's no medical detection or cure for autism. The last 50 minutes have been very satisfying and fascinating to me, hearing these medical experts speak on the research on transcendental meditation and autism. But mainly, I had an opportunity to sit with my dear friend Roberta Lowenstein, who's the founder and chair of the Joey Lowenstein Foundation. She's the mother of an incredible young man who happens to have autism, Joey Lowenstein, who I taught to meditate several years ago. And just some final remarks about your work, about the webinar that we held a couple months back that you hosted. Any final remarks?
Well, I do want to thank you, Bob, for teaching both Joey and I to meditate and the changes that we've seen in our lives. And I do want to thank Rita Cosby for being our moderator back in November at the webinar, and all the people that are involved with David Lynch Foundation that have, stepped up and are trying to help the autistic community. And you all know who you are, and I'm very excited to be co-hosting this salon coming up on March 6th at the David Lynch Foundation offices in Midtown. And I thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure, and I look forward to Joey someday speaking on the show.
Joey Lowenstein, my hero. When we come back, we're going to spend a few minutes we're going to branch out, looking at how Transcendental Meditation and what they call the Quiet Time program is being used in schools for children who suffer from a wide range of stress disorders, including autism. So we'll be right back.
This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indy 104. Bob Roth, Executive Director of the David Lynch Foundation, has helped people from all walks of life transform their lives. This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indy 104.
This is Bob Roth, and we spent the first 50 minutes or so with Roberta Lowenstein, my guest, talking about the effects of transcendental meditation on children and teens with autism spectrum disorder. In the final few minutes of the show, we're going to spread out. We're going to look at the work that the David Lynch Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit charity, which was established almost 9 years ago to bring transcendental meditation to at-risk populations, including inner-city school kids and kids with learning disorders. The effect that this transcendental meditation is having on, we call it learning readiness. And the effect is positively profound. Extensive published research on meditating school kids have found increased attendance, decreased suspensions and school violence, higher standardized test scores, higher grade point average, not just for the individual student, but for the whole school, reduced anxiety and psychological distress among students, increased self-esteem, increased emotional intelligence, and increased coping ability among children and adults. Now, why? It's such an interesting development that's taking place in education today, where we went for a long time with this focus of just cramming as much information in his poor child's head that they could possibly memorize so they could spit it back out on a test, and somehow that was considered education. But that pressure that we were putting on kids was just exploding in all directions. The number 3 cause of death among teenagers in America is suicide, drug abuse, both legal and prescription and non-prescription, skyrocketing, adult levels of hypertension among our kids. So what the emphasis leading educators now are doing, they're saying education is more than just facts and figures. Education is more than just how to deliver those facts and figures to the child, like whether use an iPad or some sort of a computer system or interesting films. Education has to be about the student herself or himself, that student's ability to learn. The emphasis, they call it, on learning readiness. When that child comes to school for that first period algebra class, are they ready to study? What have they eaten for breakfast? Have they had breakfast? Have they had any sleep the night before? What is their home life like? So more and more schools, public schools, private schools, charter schools throughout the United States and around the world are establishing what they call quiet time. 10, 15-minute period at the beginning of the school day and a 10, 15-minute period at the end of the school day, but part of the school day where the children have an opportunity, they have the option. They can sit with their eyes closed and nap. They can do silent, sustained reading, or they could practice transcendental meditation. The vast majority of kids want to learn to meditate. They relish the profound rest that the technique brings. They so appreciate the fact that after meditation, they can think more clearly, they can focus better, their memory is better, and they're happier inside. So the David Lynch Foundation, one of its main focuses, has been on establishing quiet time programs in schools throughout the United States and all over the world. And we're now in 35 countries. and we provided scholarships for over 500,000 focus on inner city school kids, because that's where the donors want the money. But we're also working in higher performing schools across the board. The purpose of the David Lynch Foundation is to bring transcendental meditation to any child anywhere in the world who wants to meditate. And I have to say that focus on children is now expanded. We're now working with veterans and their families who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. We're working with women and children who are survivors of domestic violence. And we are providing transcendental meditation in businesses, in hospitals, regular folk all over the world, everyone who suffers from stress. I really appreciate you joining me tonight for this discussion on focus on transcendental meditation and autism, and some words just on the quiet time and schools across the United States. I thank again my guest, Roberta Lowenstein, a very dear friend and a real visionary when it comes to bringing new solutions to children with autism. This is Bob Roth, Success Without Stress, Sirius 104, Indy 104.